Okay, friends, so this is the time to move to the next module, which is focusing on Administer Azure Virtual Machines. So far, we have seen Azure Virtual Network. We also know that how we can do inter-site connectivity between virtual networks. Now it's the time we have to focus on virtual machine little in depth. So obviously, we all know those things that how to create a virtual machine. But then what kind of things we have to keep in mind while creating virtual machine? And then what other things we can do as a customization options in virtual machines? That is what we are going to focus in this particular module. In this module, first we are going to start with introduction to Azure Virtual Machines. We will focus on configuring virtual machine availability, which is basically known as high availability. And then after that, obviously, like all the other modules, we have one lab which we are going to complete. So let's start with introduction to Azure Virtual Machines. While creating virtual machine, the first thing which you have to focus is you have to focus on cloud service responsibilities. Basically, virtual machine is an infrastructure as a service. So you have to understand that what kind of things you have to take care, and then what kind of things cloud provider is going to take care for that. Now we are going to talk about that. Then we'll talk about planning a virtual machine, in which we have to focus on determining virtual machine sizing and what kind of a virtual machine storage we are going to use with that. We also have to focus on some particular demo, which we're going to see in the lab part, where we will create virtual machines. And then we'll also talk about how can we connect with virtual machine securely using Azure Bastion, or maybe we can connect with directly RDP or SSH ports. Let's start with this. In this case, first we are talking about cloud service responsibilities, or the other name of this thing is known as shared service responsibilities. Now you can see in this particular diagram that you have different kind of service offerings which are available. From cloud, you have software as a service, platform as a service, and infrastructure as a service. And more or less, when you go into this different service options, the more you move from SaaS to PaaS to IaaS, the control which you're going to get on those services is going to increase. Basically, infrastructure as a service is going to give you more control. And when we talk about this, we also have to focus on shared responsibilities. Like you can see here, if you talk about information and data, or device and accounts and identity, these are those three things which are going to be managed by us. So basically managed by customers who are using cloud, and the full control of that will be in our hand. While on the other hand, there are a few things which are always taken care by cloud providers, like physical host, physical network, and physical data centers. But if we talk about the middle layers, which are focusing on identity and directory infrastructure, application, network control, and operating system, these things are going to have the differences between service responsibilities. And as you can see, only infrastructure as a service is the one which is giving you operating system level control, network level control over these resources. That's one of the reasons people go for infrastructure as a service when they want more control. When we create a virtual machine, there are a couple of things which we have to decide first. First thing is we have to start with the virtual network. So we need to focus on what kind of IP address range we want for the private IPs. We also need to focus on what kind of range specific configurations will be required in that. We have to give a proper name for the virtual machines. And above all, we have to choose a correct region, or I can say the right choice of region with respect to whatever Azure regions which are available. We know we have 70 plus Azure regions as of now, and we have these regions available in more than 140 plus countries. You have to choose the right region, you have to configure a proper virtual network, and then when you're going to do this thing, you also have to locate your virtual machines as close as possible to your users. So basically, by choosing a region, obviously we're going to focus on cost and other factors, but the most priority factor in that is you have to choose a region which is nearest to your end users. And with this, once you plan the virtual machine, you have to focus on the next thing, which is determining virtual machine sizing. Virtual machine sizing is one of that major factor which is going to impact on the costing of virtual machine. That's the reason you have to focus on what kind of a type of the virtual machine sizing you're going to use. You can go with memory optimized or compute optimized kind of virtual machine if you are looking for high compute to memory ratio or memory to compute ratio kind of things. Or maybe you are creating virtual machine for some storage configurations, then you can go with storage optimized also. There are certain virtual machine types which provide GPU accelerated virtual machines with that, or maybe you're focusing on high performance computing, then you can go with that. Remember, depends upon the type and the size which you're choosing from this different range, it's going to impact the cost of your virtual machine. So when we create virtual machine, we will talk about this, that how exactly we can control this. Second thing which you have to keep in mind is virtual machine storage. Obviously, every virtual machine can have a standard hard disk drive kind of a HDD associated with that, or maybe you can go with your premium solid state drive or a standard SSD kind of options. This kind of different operating system disk or data disk you can configure in your virtual machines. Remember, every virtual machine can have an operating system disk. With that, you can have temporary disk, which is not available in all the SKUs, but most of the SKUs are going to have this temporary disk to store a temporary data. And then you can add one or more data disk associated with that, which are all optional, but depends upon the requirement. You can choose what kind of a data disk you want to configure with that. Now, if we want to connect with virtual machine, obviously the simplest way to connect with virtual machine is you use your RDP and SSH port. And based on those port numbers, you will be able to connect to your virtual machines. But in those kind of scenarios, we mostly expose our public IP address with that. Without exposing this public IP with RDP and SSH port, you can actually use Azure Bastion. As you can see in this diagram, you have to create a separate subnet in your virtual network first with the name Azure Bastion subnet. Once you have this kind of a dedicated subnet for Bastion, that subnet will be used to deploy Azure Bastion service. Now, Bastion service is going to allow you to connect to your virtual machine in a secure environment without exposing your RDP and SSH port, which is one of the biggest plus point from the security point of view when you're using Bastion. Hey guys, sorry for interruption. My name is Maruti and I'm here to make a very important announcement. I hope you are liking our videos and you're doing a continuous learning with us on an Azure Cloud and AI related topics. If you are enjoying this thing, I'm going to announce SkillTech.club, which is our upcoming website, which is going to be launched very soon. We are here to tell you one thing, that everyone who is a subscriber of this particular channel will get Azure Cloud and Azure AI related certification courses free of cost in SkillTech.club. So you will be a part of the SkillTech.club kind of a membership automatically free of cost. And everyone who's a subscriber of this particular channel will get those benefits which are available in that. So what are you waiting for? I request you to please subscribe to this channel and share it with your friends and families if they are also interested in Azure Cloud and AI learning. That's it from my side. Now you can carry on with your learning. Thank you. Now after this, let's talk about configuring virtual machine availability. When we talk about configuring virtual machine availability, we have to focus on planned and unplanned events which can actually create a downtime for your virtual machines. And for that, you can fix those things by giving a high availability configuration to your virtual machine by configuring something called availability sets or availability zones. We'll talk about both of them in this module. And then we are going to compare vertical and horizontal scaling of the virtual machines. And we'll talk about configuring scaling associations with that. When you are configuring a virtual machine, remember Azure Cloud can have unplanned or planned maintenance events which are already part of the configuration. Now, when you create a virtual machine, you are going to have a service level agreement associated with that. Sometimes, maybe because of the unplanned hardware maintenance, you are going to have a downtime. Maybe some actions like you want to do live migration. So when the platform is going to predict a failure, it will issue an unplanned hardware maintenance event associated with that. Or maybe sometimes you're going to have unexpected downtime also when a virtual machine is going to fail unexpectedly because of some power failure, network failure kind of issues. Or maybe sometimes just to do some periodic updates or roll out some patches onto the operating system, Microsoft is going to restart the virtual machines, and because of that, you are going to have planned maintenance. Now remember, in all these kind of cases, you have to make sure that you're going to take care of this kind of a planned maintenance and downtime. How? We need to talk about that in this module. First thing which you can do is you can set up availability sets. Availability set is a configuration which is going to provide 99.95% of service level agreement when you are going to configure 2 or more instances in your availability set. Basically, instead of one computer or a one virtual machine, you're going to set 2 or more virtual machines inside one single data center of Azure. Now, when you are restricted to one single data center, availability set is going to help you by distributing your virtual machines into multiple fault domains and update domains, so that if some kind of a failure is happening, it's not going to be affecting your all the virtual machines at the same time. You can configure a fault domain range from 1, 2, and 3, which is maximum, or update domain range, which is going to be maximum 20. Depends upon that. If a failure happens, fault domain distribution is going to work, or if a manual plan update happens, the update domain distribution is going to work. When you choose higher numbers in this, obviously it's going to be a better distribution configuration, and you can choose more number of virtual machines with this. Remember, the highest availability which availability set can give you is 99.95%. And this is also true when you are going to create 2 or more virtual machines with this configuration. Also keep in mind, when you're going with availability set, this is not going to save you if you have a disaster which is affecting your whole data center. So if you want to make sure that your virtual machines are going to be safe, even if the data center fails or data center is going to be down, then in that case you have to go for the better options like availability zones, which we'll talk next. And we will talk about that very next. Before that, let's talk about the fault domain. As we said, update domain and fault domain are going to distribute your virtual machine. This particular diagram is trying to show you that you have configured 2 fault domains, and if you do that thing inside these fault domains in the separate rack, you are going to distribute your virtual machine. Because of this, your availability configurations are going to be set up. They are taking an example of a web server and the SQL database server into this case, where 2 different fault domains in one single data center are actually hosting a separate web server as well as the SQL server in the separate availability set. So you are going to create one availability set for your web, and you're going to set up another availability set for SQL. Remember, update domains are going to allow you to perform incremental or rolling upgrades across multiple deployment. Basically, when you have multiple update domains, Azure is going to make sure that all the updates are going to be rolled out into one update domain first, and if that is done, then only it will do that thing to the next update domain, not simultaneously. Same thing in the fault domain. Azure is going to make sure that your virtual machines are going to be distributed across multiple fault domains, and every fault domain is going to have a set of hardware switches that share a single point of failure kind of a configuration, and a separate fault domain is going to have a separate hardware switches. So basically, if a network failure or hardware failure kind of things happens, or even power failure kind of thing happens, both the fault domains will not get affected by the same issue. And that is how at least your some of the virtual machines will be up and running. Now let's talk about availability zones, which is obviously a much better option compared to availability set. Why? Because this is going to use multiple zones. Basically, zone are nothing but data centers. So this is basically going to use 3 data centers within one single Azure region. The logic is this is going to provide a unique physical locations within the same region. This is going to include data centers with independent power, cooling, and networking. So unlike availability sets where we are going to divide one data center into parts, here you're actually going to have separate data centers with the separate cooling, networking, and power source associated with that. This is also going to protect from data center failures, because if one data center zone is down, then also the other 2 data center zones will be available and your virtual machines will be running inside that. Basically, this is going to combine update domain and fault domain configuration with this, and it's going to provide a much better availability, which is going to be 99.99. Basically, 4.9 kind of a service level agreement availability will be available. Now, those who are new to service level agreements and high availability, remember guys, this 0.05% difference which is there is going to make a big difference when you compare the uptime and the downtime associated with this. In order to check what kind of an uptime or downtime you're going to have with this, you can just search in any search engine about uptime calculator and just put 3 nines and 4 9 inside that, and you'll realize that 4 9 is 10 times better than 3 nines. So basically that's a big difference which you should keep in mind when you have those kind of an important data which you're going to associate with your virtual machines. Now let's talk about vertical and horizontal scaling. Scaling is a very important part of cloud resources. When you talk about virtual machine, suppose if you try to increase capacity of your virtual machine in terms of storage, memory, CPU, if you add or remove more CPU, more memory into that, then that is something which is known as vertical scaling. Remember, in vertical scaling, number of computers, or I can say number of instances of virtual machines will remain same. So basically it will be one computer only, and you're going to add more CPU, more memory into that. On the other hand, when we talk about horizontal scaling, this is the one which is going to focus on creating multiple instances of your virtual machine. Basically, in this case, the amount of memory, CPU, and storage of the computer is going to be same. You're just going to add more number of instances, more number of computers into that scaling part. So basically, initially, you're going to have maybe 1 or 2 virtual machines, and you're going to add more virtual machines over a period of time. if you want to go with horizontal scaling architecture. Remember, the other words which are used for vertical and horizontal scaling is, in vertical scaling, we call it scale up and down, while in horizontal scaling, we call it scale out and scale in. With this, the one obvious question which you should have in your mind is, when we do scaling, are we going to do a manual scaling or auto scale? Well, we can do both. When you want to specify an auto scaling configuration, as you can see in the slide, you are able to configure default instance count, minimum instance, and maximum instance. And with that, you can also specify what kind of a scale out and scale in configurations you want to do with that. Most of the time, we can focus on CPU threshold or memory usage association with that. If the CPU percentage is going beyond certain limit, then maybe we want to increase the instance to one or another two more instances with that. You can set up a minimum and maximum range so that your costing should also be controlled with this, because obviously when we want to take care of scaling, we also want to take care of cost associations with that. When we can go for this kind of auto scaling configurations, you can also go for a service which is known as Virtual Machine Scale Set. Remember guys, Virtual Machine Scale Set is a separate service which allows you to create multiple instances of virtual machines in one shot. It's one of the most powerful services of Azure, where you can actually create hundreds of virtual machines in one shot. With this, we are done with this particular module, and that means that it's a time to go on to the next lab, which is lab number 8.